Hello, welcome to the podcast. This week on the podcast, we'll be looking at the cage system again, having a little bit of a look over that, and we'll be looking at something called the Octave Map, which is how you connect notes on the guitar together, and also a little bit of a primer on fingerpicking. But before then, I'd like to say I'm sorry there's not been a podcast for the last few weeks. I've had a little bit of a busy sort of period. I've been recording and rehearsing. And doing and gigging as well, doing quite a good bit of that. So it's been a little bit busy, but we're back to it now, so it's all cool. So the first thing I want to talk about is the cage system. Back in podcast 5, I sort of introduced the idea of the cage system, and since then a couple of you have messaged me asking a little bit more about it. It's a ridiculously useful way of knowing where the 5 main shapes on the guitar are for each chord that you play and how they connect together. There's now a worksheet underneath that podcast, which will also be underneath this podcast on the website, which has got that mapped out as a graphic so that you can actually see how the chords connect together. So that's just a little bit about that, really. The Octave Map, which is the main thing that I want to talk about in this week's podcast, is how you can easily find any note on the guitar really quickly. Now this is going to need you to know a couple of things. The first thing you're going to need to know is your musical alphabet. Now back in podcast 2, I think it was, I talked about the musical alphabet, learning the notes of the E string, the A string and the D string on the dots, at least. You know, that's the main thing that you want to learn, the main place that you need to know them. It's good to know every note on the guitar if you can, but that's a good place to start, the notes on the dots. Now one of the other reasons why this is important is because once you know those dots, you've got a foothold in knowing all of the notes on the guitar. It doesn't mean that you know all the notes on the guitar, but it means that you're not far away. And we can use what I call the Octave Map to kind of learn that. So the Octave Map is on the same sheet as the cage system on the worksheet, and the reason why it's on the same sheet as the cage system is because all of the root notes for the chords in the cage system, all of the 5 C positions, are the root notes that we're going to use on the Octave Map to learn how they connect together. So I'm going to show you how that works. So the cage system had a C shape, an A, which is still a C chord, it's just an A shape, a G, which is a C chord but a G shape, an E, which is a C chord but an E shape, a D, and then we're back to C again at the top, and that's diagrammed on the caged system map on the worksheet. Well, the root notes from each one of those chords. From the C chord we had the 2 C notes. From the A shape chord we had these 2 C notes. From the G we had these 3. From the E we had these 2 and this one again. From the D, and then from the C at the top we had those 2. So this gives you what I call the Octave Map, and if you learn how these connect together, you can get to the point where you can move through them quite quickly. So you could go like this. And you could carry on going up the neck like that if you wished. Now the trick with this is to get really quick at moving through it so that you can zip through this sequence of notes quite comfortably. Now let's just pick any note. If we pick any note at random on the guitar, let's say this one. So if I'm trying to work out what that note is, all I've got to do is kind of find where it fits in to that octave map. So if I find an octave of it, for example, might octave it down using that octave shape, and then I know where I am within the octave map then. Now I know instantly that now that note is an E flat because it's brought me to an E flat on the E string on the 11th fret, which is quite easy, but also it brought me to this E flat here. This is an E, this is an E flat. Okay, so this is kind of how you use the octave map. I hope this is kind of making sense. It's the map itself doesn't tell you what the note is, but it will lead you to a note that you know. So if you know the notes on the E, A and D string quite well, but you're not so familiar with the notes on the G or the B string, then this will help you get it onto a fret that you recognise. Similarly, if it was, if it's a note on the E string, it's easy because if you know the E string, you know the other E string, they're both the same. So if you know this is an A, then this is an A. If it was this note, you might not know that. Now, because it's on the B string, I know that I can octave across with like the C shape, if you will, and again, that's brought me to the E flat again. I seem to be randomly choosing quite a lot of E flats today. I don't know why. I'm feeling quite jazzy, perhaps. But that's the whole idea of the octave map, that anywhere there's a note, you can find out where that note is. So if you're playing a blues thing in A, for example, you might be having a look, doing a little bit of lead stuff, and you want to find wherever the A notes are on the neck, you can again use this octave map to go and find all of the A's. And that gives you something really solid that you can root on if you're doing a solo, if you're doing like a little blues octave thing. I know that's an A because I've octaved it through, and then if I want to find another one, I can octave across. And I can find where all of these notes are using this, the layout of the octave map. So I suggest that you take some time and really try and learn that, because it's, you know, not enough importance, I think, is put on what guitarists know. Like, you know, if you know what you're doing, for example, if you know what your notes are called, if you know what your root notes are called. And so often guys tend to just sort of go on websites and learn where the fingers go, but not learn what the chords are called, or not learn what the notes are called. And knowing your notes is really important. It just gives you another piece of the puzzle, it gives you another piece of information, and you can choose to use that information however you fancy. So that's the octave map. The worksheet's below this video on the website, and if you're watching this on YouTube, the link to the website is below this video in the comments section. So that's the octave map. The next thing I want to look at is fingerpicking. Fingerpicking is one of my favourite plays of playing acoustic guitar. I love the way that it sounds, and it gives you access to more interesting kind of variations than just strumming does. You know, it's a little bit more delicate. But getting started on fingerpicking can seem quite complicated. So the way that I suggest doing it, we'll take a D chord, for example, and we're going to take our right hand. So you've got your thumb, first, second, third and fourth finger. We're only going to pick with the thumb and those three. And the way we're going to lay this out, we're going to put the thumb on the D string, we're going to put the index finger, the first finger, on the G, we're going to put the second finger on the B, and the third finger on the E. You're going to turn your hand very slightly so that your fingers pull up into the strings. Now I've got nails, you can do this without nails. You'll find that after a while your fingertips will callous a little bit and it'll start sounding a little bit brighter. It'll be a little bit dull to begin with, and it will hurt your fingers a little bit, but you know, you've got to man up and just work through that. So we're going to play the thumb first, then the first, second, third, thumb, first, second and third fingers. And that's going to give us this nice little pattern. Thumb, first, second, third. It's nice and simple. Bit out of tune. So when you've done that, I want you to then think about the different combinations that you could do. If we always start with the thumb, there's basically 6 different patterns that you can do. You can go thumb 1 as the first 2 notes, and then 2, 3, which you just done. You can go thumb 1, 3, 2. That's quite nice. You can go thumb 2, 1, 3. Or thumb 2, 3, 1. Or you can go thumb 3, 1, 2. Or thumb 3, 2, 1. So that gives you 6 different picking combinations that you can do. Again, we're just on a D chord, and you know, just rolling through those, see how they sound. If you want to make it more interesting, you can make a 2-bar repeating phrase instead of a 1-bar repeating phrase. So that's a 1-bar repeating phrase because it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's a bar of picking. If we wanted to, we could go, say, thumb 1, 2, 3, and then thumb 3, 2, 1. And that would give us a 2-bar repeating phrase, which would sound something like this. So that gives you a nice, slightly more interesting sound than doing it just the same repeating pattern over and over. Then you could take the variations and you could make a 2-bar phrase with the variations. So you could go thumb 2, 1, 3, thumb 3, 1, 2. That sounds quite nice as well. So this is the simplest way, I think, of getting into the idea of finger picking. You're doing it with 4 beats, so it's covering a bar, and then you've got the 6 different variations that you can do with each chord. And you're just thinking about, you know, start from the thumb, and then when you start from, say, the first finger, there's 2 different variations you can do next. You can go 2, 3 or 3, 2. And then that same principle applies for each finger that you've got, which gives you 6 different variations altogether. And then you can just play through your chords with those. When you change to a different chord, like a C, for example, you leave your top fingers where they are, your first, second and third finger, but your thumb then goes to the root note of the C chord. So you get thumb, 1, 2, 3, going across like that. Now, On a C chord, there's another variation of that, which is that you can leave the thumb on the C and you can pull these fingers back onto the D, G and B string respectively to get a slightly different sound. So if we did like a 2-bar pattern, you could go sort of thumb 1, 2, 3, thumb 3, 2, 1. Say do that twice. And then if you wanted to, you could move the fingers down to the lower strings and back again, which gives you, again, more interesting sort of variations. There's going to be more of this to come in the podcast, so I'm going to get into some slightly more stylised playing and maybe look at the way that different guitar players sound when they're doing fingerpicking. But this is a really, really good place to start. The biggest things to think about with the fingerpicking is make sure that all of the chord sounds clear, and make sure that when you're using your hand, you just turn your hand ever so slightly so that your fingers pull up into the strings and give you a really nice clear tone. If you've got nails, that's great. If you want to do fingerpicking a lot with acoustic guitar, I'd recommend growing your nails out just a little bit. Mine are a little bit long at the moment, to be honest. Probably do with cutting them down, but they still pick okay, so that's okay. So that wraps up the podcast. We've got the chord cage system, which helps you map the neck, and the worksheet that goes along with that underneath this video. You've got the Octave Map, which helps you find the notes anywhere on the guitar in conjunction with the cage system, and also learning the notes from podcast 2. We've got a little bit of finger picking, and you know, that just makes your playing sound a little bit more interesting, better than strumming all the time. You can break some finger picking out, sounds a little bit more intriguing. You've got 6 different combinations that you can do with your fingers with the basic layout for now, and then you can, as you move across the chords, you can make that a bit more interesting. Over the next few podcasts, I might start looking at some styles of different guitarists. So if you want to message in, either email in at info@johnwdoyle.net, or go on the Facebook page or tweet or any of that kind of stuff, you know how it works, with which players you might like to hear, then I'm going to start looking at doing a little bit of that. So, you know, keep your requests coming in. And aside from that, thanks again for all of your support, as usual. Thank you very much for anybody who sent messages in, asking questions, and in anticipation of the next podcast as well. So this podcast is over. I will see you next time. Thanks very much.